The first issue would be, when do we photograph fingerprints? Most cases, we're just going to go ahead and dust and lift and move on. But there are some cases where once you dust, the lift is going to be a challenge. It could be questionable. It could be impossible, depending on the circumstances. So those photographs need to be taken in lieu of a lift card. So I have a fingerprint surface. I can see the result. Maybe it's a textured surface, but trying to lift this is going to be very difficult. Well, the photograph may be my best evidence at that point. So then it needs to be photographed properly, including the scale. The other possibility is we need to take photographs because it's a major case and we just want to be doing everything we can to make sure that we're not going to have any problems with any of our evidence. It's also possible with a photograph to do enhancement so that we can bring out more detail in a fingerprint. So these are things that we could consider. We want to photograph the lift just to make sure we have the evidence detail, or maybe that's the only way to capture it. Or we may want to later use these photographs to bring out more detail in our image. As far as the equipment goes, we're going to use a digital camera with a macro or close-up lens attachment. And gray cards are good for ambient light exposures. And we could just be firing our flash willy-nilly, but normally when you're dusting, you've got lighting that you are providing, either with a flashlight or something, and just going ahead and documenting with the gray card to get the right exposure and so forth will be fine. Here is a device, not one that we've seen before. This one is pretty specific for fingerprints. It actually has, it's a close-up filter with a lucite tube on it. And it's designed to use, as you see here, you can just photograph right through it. The tube positions it at the right distance and it allows light to come through the sides. Now, I did mention earlier that with especially the close-up filter type devices, you have a problem with edge-to-edge sharpness. Here is a photograph taken right with what you see on the screen now. Notice how the edges are out of focus, but the center is pretty clear. Once again, go ahead and use the smaller lens openings when you can to get the best results. And then one other thought here, this is a fingerprint examiner's glass. So if you're doing fingerprint examination, you may have one of these to look through. You can often just set your camera over it and take a picture through it. Another way to do these is with a fingerprint imaging workstation. And here is one, this camera system that is really designed for fingerprints. It comes with a specialized or adapted, let's say, Nikon camera body and lens. And what they have done is they have taken out the filter in front of the sensor inside the camera so that you can do ultraviolet and infrared photography as well. It's got lighting built in. Here's some lighting here, and there's other. It has filters so that you can use the alternate light source. It has alternate light source built into it, different wavelengths. So it's quite impressive. And if you need to photograph a fingerprint or even find fingerprints, you can often use this as a good tool. Let's now talk about how we can photograph some fingerprints. The first thing, of course, is we need to establish the location of our evidence. So at the beginning tonight, I said we need to have two photographs, one to show where our evidence is and another to show the detail. Well, if you do that with fingerprints, it can get quite tedious. Let's say that you have multiple fingerprints that you're going to lift off the side of this car. Well, I suppose you could do what we see here. We have all of them dusted and the tape applied and they're numbered. And now we take a photograph, we can see where each one is. And then we can go ahead and photograph each one individually before we lift them. And then go ahead and take our, of course, you'd want to be a lot closer than this for a decent photograph of the fingerprint. But then you would go ahead and then do your lift. Well, that's going to be a lot of work. It can be a bit confusing. We do fill out a card for each of our lifts. This is the backing card. On one side, this side that has printing, is where we write down case information, information about the lift, and then we also draw a diagram. And then on the opposite side of the card, which is glossy, that's where we place our lift. One of the most important parts is this diagram. As an example, if I'm going to lift a fingerprint off this door, what I've done here is I've made a little shaded spot. This is my lift, and it's 24 inches from the bottom of the door and 12 inches from the edge of the door. And this direction's up. And then on the opposite side, when I put the latent on there, I indicate which way is up. So we're already going to a lot of detail and trouble to establish where the prints are. So for latent fingerprints, we can say that taking a mid-range shot to show where the fingerprint is optional. It may be unnecessary because you're going to do a lift card. All right, so, and this is about the only thing I can think of that would be that. But if you have if you just have a fingerprint and you can see where it is and you can do your mid-range shot, great, do it. But if you have 20 of them that you're trying to lift, doing all those mid-ranges and all that, that's going to be a lot of work. And since we're putting these on the cards themselves, I don't think it's all that necessary. That would be the exception. All right. Here we have palm prints and fingertips. I'm going to go ahead and I've already dusted, but I'm going to go ahead and lift them. I have photographed to show where this is. And now I can go ahead and do my close-up for detail, or just go ahead and do my lifts. Now let's talk about the close-ups to show detail. So we need to have our film plane parallel to our evidence, to our fingerprint. Again, that's a key thing with this type of evidence. And then we're going to use lighting and exposure properly so that we can get as much detail as we require. So let's just talk about a couple of different things we might come across. If we have just normal dusted prints, they're easy to see. Sometimes you don't even need to use a flash. You have enough lighting because you can see it with your naked eye fine. Try just photographing the way it lays. Then see if maybe using some additional lighting might help. Maybe while you're setting it up, use your flashlight preview. See if that might be a way to improve on the result. If you have a fingerprint that is an impression, so it's pressed into a material, maybe it's a tacky surface like a freshly painted surface or tar, then what you're going to need to do is actually have oblique lighting. So you have your lighting at a low angle to create little shadows so you can see your detail. Now, porous surfaces you must also be careful with, because if you're going to use lighting, you don't want to create shadows that are too large to be able to see the detail. So if we go back to the fingerprints and palms, notice is the texture in the wall. So this is a heavily textured wall. And when you get the lighting at angles, it's going to cause shadows in the texture. So we have all sorts of shadows showing up. And those can easily interfere with the detail of your fingertips and fingerprints. So for glass, we can use different techniques, some of what we've already seen, but let's just look at kind of a study of a glass. And what we'll do is look at different ways to photograph the same print. And one thing it does is it tells us there's not just one way always to photograph these different things. So here we have a fingerprint on a glass. So there's the fingerprint. There's a lip mark also. Now this is not meant to be the photograph of the fingerprint. This is just to say there's a fingerprint on a glass, all right? Because we need to get in much closer, right? Also, this is a photograph taken before any dusting. So what you just see there is how I can see the print, which is just a normal perspiration, skin oil type print, all right? So now we're going to move in close to take photographs. So let me describe each one. This one is first, it was taken with no dusting. All right, so you've held a glass up to the light before and seen fingerprints on it. Well, that's what I've got going here. To explain the setup, which is going to stay, part of it's going to stay constant. I have the glass on a tabletop. I have the camera mounted on a tripod, so I don't have to keep moving around and trying to manipulate it while I'm working. And then I have, in this case, a steady burning lamp. The light is, for this photograph, positioned to the left of the camera, kind of your left shoulder if you were looking at the through the camera, and it's reflecting off of the glass and then back toward the right. So this is what I got as I move the light source around, and I move the glass around slightly without any dust, any fingerprint powder. You know, you might say, well, you didn't do a very good job because you get this really bright spot here. Well, let me explain. The glass is curved, all right? And as I position the light, if I move the light so the light was over here, this all went black because of the curvature of the glass. Well, here's the main part. We got core, delta, all that stuff. We want this to be showing the most. So then when I move the light over here, all of this went dark. It wasn't much of an improvement. So what did I do? I positioned the light here so the main part could be recorded. And then just using that steady burning lamp, no flash, I snapped the picture. So that's one way. Now let's go ahead and dust this up and see if we get some, usually we're going to get a little more contrast when we dust, but it's kind of nice to photograph it first, just in case something goes wrong. Okay, now I have dusted. Now I have some more contrast here. I still have the camera set up the way I described, and I have the lamp to my left shoulder. However, now that I have more contrast here by having the fingerprint powder for the light to reflect off of as well, I can move the light source more to the left now with my reflection and have all of this show clearly. It did wash out a little bit here. If I went any further, this became black again because of the curvature of the glass. So as you can see, by dusting, I now have made it easier to see the result. And we have a little better better positioning of the light. Okay, next. This is transmitted lighting. The light's coming through the glass toward the camera. All right, so I have this light source coming through. I like transmitted lighting. Look at how nice and clear things have gotten here as well. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you have something that's not transparent, the light's not going to come through. So my scale is now turned dark. What I should have had one of these transparent scales. They're not, super clear, but they let enough light through that you'll be able to read the numbers when you can't read them here. Sure, I can still use this because if I look back at this picture, I know what all those little marks mean. And so when I go to this picture, they make sense. In fact, I could go into Photoshop and put all the little numbers in if I wanted to in the picture, and that would be totally acceptable. However, it would have been nice to have the transparent scale. All right, so now those were done with just a steady burning lamp. The next one, I'm going to go ahead and take the photograph, and instead of using the steady burning lamp where it is right now, I'm going to put an electronic flash and take the same picture. I knew where to put the flash because I previewed it with the steady burning lamp, the photograph before that. I saw the result, I could see it in my viewfinder, but all I did then was position the electronic flash where I had placed my steady burning lamp. So that's the power of previewing. Mirrors. Now, let's say you have evidence. It could even be something like someone wrote something on a mirror. Well, how do you photograph something like that? Well, obviously, you're going to get reflection. So bounce lighting often will work well with mirrors so that you don't get your light reflecting back. Shooting at an angle for something like someone writing on the glass is acceptable so that you're not in the picture. But what about a fingerprint? When you try to keep your film plane parallel, isn't the camera going to show in the photograph of the fingerprint on the mirror? Well, yes, it will. So here we have a setup. There are some fingerprints. This is a mirror, big mirror here. And this is, there are some fingerprints here. And we've got the camera set up, ready to take a photograph. And here's the picture. So it came out well. However, here is the lens in the picture. Now, I wouldn't really worry about this that much, but let's just say you want to eliminate that. It is possible to do, and that is to rig up something like this. So what I did is I took a piece of foam core board, I cut a hole in it the size of the lens. I put that in front of the camera over the lens. So now all that could record would in fact be the lens itself. Remember, our film plane has to stay parallel. So what I'm going to do is move the camera back slightly and then over one direction. In this case, I'm going to go to the left. I'm going to move the camera to the left, but my film plane is still parallel with the mirror. I'm just over to the left and back a little bit. Now, I have to refocus on the fingerprints. Now, when I take the photograph, the fingerprints, the background for the fingerprints now is this reflected image of the foam core board and no longer the camera itself. I had to sacrifice a little bit by moving back a bit. And then all you do is you go ahead and crop your image to get the result. Okay, reflective surfaces. Often we'll have fingerprints on a reflective surface, and photographing reflective surfaces is always a challenge. On the screen here at the bottom is a little gun, and we have it set up underneath a copy camera. Here's one light and another light to the left. The weapon was recovered. It was sent to Prince. They dusted it and found some fingerprints, and they wanted the fingerprints photographed before trying to lift them. When they took the first photograph, the light coming down and hitting the edge of the gun created a strip of light, a highlight that reflected onto the film. So they had a streak of light that went right across their image of the fingerprint. So there was a fingerprint somewhere here. The light comes down, it hits the edge and goes up, and there's the nice fingerprint with a white line through it. Well, they didn't want that. So what did they do? They went ahead and took this white plastic container fashioned by cutting the top of the water bottle off, a hole in the bottom of the water bottle for the lens to look through, and then openings on the side, so if they needed to, they could set it down over a rifle barrel or a knife or something long. And then now when they take the photograph, the light will come down and have to pass through the white plastic water bottle and then reflect up. And because there's a hole here, there's not going to be any obstruction, but that light gets diffused as it passes through the water bottle. And so that was enough to reduce that highlight to where they got a much better result.